technically, yes, it can be done, then as we await for, as he said, maybe an appellate court to overturn it, what happens in the next couple days? Do the other states all go along? Do they have a choice? Can you explain?
What happens is this executive order is not in effect now. And I think this is more common than perhaps Paul is suggesting. It just happened to President Obama in Texas. Remember, the Texas opponents of his immigration executive order, that is President Obama's, got a district judge in Brownsville, Texas, to say that executive order was not in effect. It was appealed to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit upheld that nationwide ban. So this is going to go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which tends to be one of the more liberal circuits,
yes.
and they may well uphold this. So this is
so Jeff, hold on. Let me just understand, because people watching,
sure.
I know there's a little bit of a delay. You're halfway around the world, but people watching right now are saying, okay, what's about to happen? What's about to happen at JFK, at LAX, at O'Hare, at Hartsfield? I mean, are they about to say no longer? This can't be. I mean, this now is the law of the land, that they're going to go back to the way things were right now?
That's right. That's if they follow the ruling of the judge, and federal judges have nationwide jurisdiction on constitutional matters. If this executive order is a legal nullity, as the lawyers say at the moment, it does not apply anywhere in the United States, and that's where we are right now until unless an appeals court steps in.
Well, let me ask you, both of you, Paul and Jeffrey, this is David Gergen. If the United States, the government's going to immediately appeal, can they get the circuit court, the appellate court, to put a stay on effect on what the judges?
They'll move for a stay, but as Jeffrey was saying, this is the Ninth Circuit, and they tend to be very liberal.
But then can't you take it to the Supreme Court?
Well, you could go immediately to the Supreme Court, but as Aaron is asking, what's happening right now in airports across America? Technically, this is a lawful order of a federal court, and if it's in effect right now, they should be responding to it.
So how quickly can, say, the Ninth Circuit of the Trump administration will move immediately, right?
Yes.
So does the Ninth Circuit Court wait till Monday? I mean, are we now in for a weekend of chaos here?
Well, I think that the Ninth Circuit will see that this is an issue of national importance and urgency, and probably will meet immediately to make a decision as to whether they'll issue a stay or not.
So let's say the Ninth Circuit approves and it goes to the Supreme Court. How long, Jeffrey, in your judgment, would it be before we get a decision from the Supreme Court?
Well, I think we could get a stay decision from the Supreme Court within a matter of days. I mean, it has to go to the Ninth Circuit first, but you won't get a final ruling from the Supreme Court in a matter of days. But they act on stays, on emergency matters, whether it is executions or the applications of law, in a matter of days. So this will be feverish legal maneuvering on both sides over the next couple of days. But just so we're clear, the status quo as of this moment is that this executive order does not apply anywhere in the United States unless and until a superior court, a higher court, overrules or stays this order.
So what happens to all the people who are caught up in the coils of the current executive order?
Well,
what happens to them?
Well, there's a new order in place now that has negated and made this executive order a nullity. So we're back to the old set of rules as of this moment. So
we were reporting 100,000 visas possibly affected by this. Jeff Toobin, are they now back to the way they were? I mean, this is pretty stunning. I mean, you have the entire world now in complete confusion on whether you can come to the United States or not on this ban.
Aaron, I think you captured the situation in two words: complete confusion. I mean, you know, lawyers like me can say, sure, it doesn't apply anywhere in the United States, but the fact that we are saying this on CNN does not mean that every airport authority at Dulles or JFK or Logan Airport actually knows what's going on right now.
You know, I might
well, there's probably people standing in customs lines watching CNN right now. I mean, the customs officers aren't going to.
I might throw into the mix a quote from, and ancient president, I think it might have been Andrew Jackson, who was angry that another Chief Justice named Marshall had issued an opinion that he opposed, and his comment was, Marshall has issued his opinion, now let's see him enforce it. So the question is, if Trump decides not to order these various departments to abide by the order, how will the Seattle federal judge enforce the order? Normally they have marshals in their local districts who can go into an airport and enforce it.
The law of the land would be to, the law of our land is that a federal judge has the authority to do this on constitutional issues. So to go otherwise would be to break the constitutional law of this land.
There would be a constitutional crisis unless the appellate courts act. And it's why most federal district courts are sensible enough to issue a stay while these difficult questions are being decided. Instead of
most appellate courts.
Most appellate courts and most district courts as well.
So let me ask you that question, because this comes on the same day, okay? The first victory for the administration on this issue was up in Boston. A federal court declined to renew the temporary restraining order, which was put in place in Boston on the first day of this ban. Jeffrey, I guess the question for you is, we got 50 states. This is the first place that this has happened. It took a week to do so. Why?
Well, because different federal judges see the law differently, and this is why we have appeals courts. This is why we have a Supreme Court ultimately to resolve differences among federal judges. The problem is what happens in the meantime before we get a definitive ruling from the Supreme Court, or at least from one of the 12 circuit courts of appeals, is that you have different district judges viewing these issues differently and going back to the words you used, complete confusion in the meantime.
And let me ask you the question, but when it gets to the Supreme Court, as it very likely will, what do you gentlemen think is the likelihood that the Supreme Court would actually hold this unconstitutional?
Well, you know, it's interesting because you have a 4-4 liberal-conservative split on the Supreme Court right now.
Neil Gorsuch and...
Yes, and you know, if they just split along strict ideological grounds and 4 voted for Trump and 4 voted the other way, that would merely uphold the lower court ruling. So if the lower court ruled nationwide, it goes forward, that's what would stay in effect. The lower court is the Ninth Circuit, which tends to be more liberal than other courts, so my bet is the more liberal approach to this, the more anti-Trump approach, might be how it turns out if it gets to the Supreme Court. But of course, this is very speculative.
What do you think, Jeff?
And let me just add to that you know, I think it is quite possible that parts of the executive order might be upheld, but parts would be struck down. Remember also, this is something of a moving target. What the executive order has meant, even to the federal government, has not been clear. At first, it was being applied against people with green cards. Now the Department of Homeland Security has said, no, people with green cards are not affected. So I think even the meaning of the executive order, much less its constitutionality, is unclear at the moment, and that will certainly affect how it's evaluated by the courts as we go forward.
You know, Aaron, I wonder if they're going to let Jeff Toobin back into the country. That's,
I mean, David Drucker from the Washington Examiner is joining us in this conversation. I mean, David, as we're honestly at this point, you know, completely at a loss, I think, to understand what the impact is going to be at this nation's airports as people are trying to enter right now. You're saying this is something that doesn't surprise you, though, that this happened simply because of the way this executive order was written and executed, because of part of what Jeffrey Toobin was saying, right? We didn't even know at first whether green cards were included or excluded.
Yeah, Aaron, the administration was in effect making policy on the fly. They pushed this through in the first 10 days. They didn't have an attorney general in place. They still don't. They had a Homeland Security secretary just getting up to speed. They didn't have a Secretary of State. And so I think they were trying to figure this out. And this is what happens when you rush, especially with executive orders that don't have the same force of law, because the courts are going to look at an executive order differently in this case than something that has gone through Congress. They're much more hesitant, and I'd let Jeffrey speak to this and your other guest, but they're much more hesitant to get in the way of something that has the seal of approval of Congress and an actual law than simply a president's pen and phone, so to speak. And so I think that this was part of the